Okay, good afternoon, all. We're going to start a new topic today, and the topic we're starting is called synthetic geometry. In your textbook, I think it just says Geometry 1. Synthetic geometry is similar, I suppose, in some ways to the coordinate geometry that we already studied, except that we don't tend to use coordinates or formula. Okay, it's still going to be all about lines and points and line segments and angles as we go through it. And I suppose, I know we've said this before, the word geometry as well comes from the geo and the metry from Greek, to measure the world. And it sprung up a long time ago in Greece because of the need to measure areas, measure usually land, irregular shaped fields and that type of thing, because land has always had a great importance to a lot of societies around the world. So, to get into it, today we're going to discuss a few key terms, and these key terms are defined as well in your textbook, so you don't need to worry about writing them down. Just listen to what I have to say for now, and if you want a recap of them, maybe have a read over the textbook afterwards. It's on page 147. Okay, so the key terms we want to go through are a line, a point, a line segment, collinear, ray, and plane. Okay, so starting with the plane is just a flat surface. So if we remember from coordinate geometry, we had a coordinated plane. It was just a flat surface with two axes, and there were a bunch of coordinates. The axes were had scales on them, and we could plot points. Okay, so in this case, though, we're not going to be worrying about coordinates. It's not going to be a coordinated plane. A plane is just going to be any flat surface that we work on. So in this case, it's going to be my pad here, but when we're in school, it would be the whiteboard. In your personal time, it'll be your copybook. So that's the plane. Okay, the next thing we'll talk about are points. Now, we'd like to understand what each of these things are, and quite often there are a certain way of writing these things down, and that's what we really want to get to today as well. So a point is just, for all intents and purposes, just going to be a dot when we're drawing things. Okay, it's going to be a dot. It's not going to have any length or width. It's going to be the tiniest point you could draw, but since we're only human, it'll be the size of our pens. So that's a point, and a point is going to have a label or a name, okay? And how we generally label them at Junior Cycle and throughout the maths world really is we label points with a capital letter. So you can give a point any name you want. So for instance, I'm going to call this B, this point, but it's got to be a capital letter. That's the usual way we label them. We save the lowercase letters for labeling lines. Okay, so that's the point B. And over here I have the point G. Okay, capital letter again, just like in coordinate geometry. Okay, and I'm going to have to, because I've only got one hand to hold the camera here, I'm going to be pausing and drawing lines in between and then starting up again. So for a moment I'm going to pause and come back. Okay, so I drew a line which went through the point B and through the point G and is going on forever in both directions. So I got to the edge of the page and then I drew an arrow here to show that it continues on in that direction. And I'm drawing an arrow over here to show that it continues on in this direction. Now this is a line. It's the line BG, and this is how I write a line, just BG like that. Okay, this line BG could have been written in another way. It could have been written as the line GB. So the line BG is the line which goes through B and G, has to go through both points and continues on forever in both directions. The line GB is the line which goes through G and goes through B and continues on forever in either direction. So they're the exact same line, but I can give them different names. Okay. Another thing to be said about these lines as well is that I don't have to pick a specific 2 points on that line to name this line. If there were, for instance, other points on this line, like we'll call this point capital F and this point capital M maybe. Okay, this exact same line could have been called the line MG, because I picked these 2 points, are the line GF, or indeed the line FG, FM, FB, BF, any of those names, okay? So that's how we label lines. There's one other way we label a line as well. So we have 2 ways of doing it, either using 2 points on the line, any 2 points on the line, or we label lines with a lowercase letter as well. So I'm just going to draw a second line so we don't get mixed up here. Okay, so I drew another line here, and now it's just a coincidence that it seemed to end up at the same place as this one, but it continues on forever in this direction and forever in this direction, and the name I've given this line is the line D. Now, that, because it's a lowercase letter, is just the name of the line. It's not a point on the line. There is no point D, because if there were a point D, it would have to be a capital letter I would be using, okay? So you can use one lowercase letter to identify the name of a line, or you can pick, again, I could call this either line D, or if I knew 2 points on this line, for instance, again, P, Q, I could call it the line PQ. So that's lines and points. Okay, so we've talked about the line, the point, the plane. The next thing is a line segment. Now, a line segment is a portion of a line. It's a portion of a line which has a very definite starting point and a very definite finishing point. Okay, so it doesn't go on forever in either direction. So because a line segment is a part of a line, we could see there is a line segment on this line PQ. There is a line segment PQ, but we write it differently to identify that it's a line segment and not a line we're talking about. If I was talking about just this segment of this line that goes from Q to P and not the rest of the line that continues on in either direction, I would call that line segment, and I use these square brackets, Q, P, which means it doesn't go any further than Q. This square bracket is like a stop telling you don't go any further in that direction. Okay, and same on the other side, don't go any further, don't go past the P. So that's the line segment QP. And sometimes when we don't use the word line and we don't use the word line segment, if you just saw something like, again, if I put it up here, if you just saw this PQ written like that, you'd know that they were talking about the full line because they didn't have these square brackets around it. Whereas if I put this here, now you know that I'm just talking about the segment between the P and the Q, this short length here. Okay? So you can draw a line segment or label a line segment which is part of a line, or also you can just draw a line segment in isolation. I'll just draw that now. Okay, I've just drawn a line segment here. This is the letter N, letter R. So this is the line segment NR, or let's just write that down, NR with the square brackets to tell us that it's a line segment, or equally I could call it the line segment RN, because the direction doesn't matter when we're describing this. You know, the line segment NR rather, is the exact same as the line segment RN. From here to here, here to here, it's the same line segment. Okay? Okay, the next thing that we're going to think about is the term collinear. Okay, so collinear is basically when points are all in a straight line. So any 2 points are always collinear, because any 2 points you pick, you know, you can draw a straight line between them. It doesn't matter, you know, I could draw a straight line from this P to this F, so they're always going to be collinear. So usually when we're talking about collinear, we're talking about 3 or more points. So we can see, for instance, if we look at this, that F, G, M, B, they are collinear. I can draw one line, straight line, that passes through all of these points, in which case they are collinear. Whereas if I look at point P and G and Q, they're not collinear. There is no way I can draw a straight line which passes through P, Q, and G. You know, I'd have to go up and down, or I'd have to curve up and around, but there is no way I could draw one single straight line to go through P, Q, and G, so they're not collinear. So collinear just means all the points are in a straight line. Okay, nearly there. One more now, and it's the ray we're talking about. So the ray is sort of like halfway between a line segment and a line. So if we saw that a line segment starts at one point, ends at another point, it doesn't go on past that point, doesn't go on past this point. Okay, whereas a line goes on forever in each direction past the points that name the line. So for instance, if this is the line BG, it goes on forever past G, or past B rather, and just keeps going that direction. And same for the G, it just keeps going past G and on forever in this direction. Well, a ray is like a line which goes on forever in one direction but stops at another point. Okay, I'm just going to draw one there. Okay, that's the ray that I've drawn there. It's the ray AY. So I'm going to call it ray AY. Okay, and the way we write it, I can't write it like that just because without any brackets or anything, it just looks like a line. That's the way we'd write a line, but it's not a line because it doesn't continue on forever past the A here. It does continue on to infinity or forever past the Y. So what we do is, like the line segment, when it doesn't continue on forever past it, we put this square bracket to say stop. You're not going anywhere past or in the beyond that A in that direction. So this is the ray AY, and that's how we write it, with a bracket on one side and no bracket on the other side. So it doesn't go past the A in this direction, but it does continue past the Y. And I like to think of it, when we think about rays, I like to think of them as like the rays of the sun. You know, that they start at the sun and then they continue on forever pretty much in space until they hit something. They're also known as, you might see in some texts, they're also known as a half line. Okay, so a half line AY. Now the thing to remember about these as well is that you see this line segment RN or NR, that's fine. This line up here could be the line BG or the line GB, it didn't matter the order. For a ray, we cannot say that this is the ray, we'll say AY like this. We cannot say that, okay? Nor can we say it's the ray YA like that. The order does matter. It really does matter. In this case, the bracket can only be next to the A, and generally speaking, we have the whatever point has the bracket next to it as the first letter that we use when we're describing it. So we can't do that. We can't do that. They would not be valid. Okay. One last thing then I think to remember before we do one exercise is if when you're talking about a line segment, we use this kind of notation. When we're talking about a line, we use this notation. When we're talking about a ray, we use this notation. Okay, so those are the three different notations. There's one other notation that we use today, and it's only used when we're dealing with line segments, but it's when we're talking about the length of an actual line segment. So for instance, if we look up here, this, if I'm just talking about the line segment Rn, I can say this is the line segment Rn, and I use these brackets. But if I want to talk about the length of this line segment, which we'll just measure using a ruler here. Oops. Length of it is approximately, I'm going to say 78 millimeters. Okay. If I want to talk about the length of this being 78 millimeters, I have to say Rn is equal to 78 millimeters, and the way I write length is with two straight lines on either side. So I know I'm talking about a line segment, but it's the length of the line segment Rn is equal to 78.